Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
And welcome to another exciting episode of Gardening Tips from Jesus. Today we'll be discussing proper seed distribution, soil composition, moisture retention, and if time permits, composting. Who knew the Son of God had such strong opinions about topsoil? Of course, all of you veteran Bible scholars know that Jesus was not trying to win the Farmer of the Year award. He wasn't giving agricultural advice. Of course, he was giving us a parable. And parables, these are wonderfully strange things. They are not simply illustrations. They are not simply moral fables. Parables are invitations. Jesus even tells us by whom and why. He quotes the prophet Isaiah and he says, "There are people who hear but do not understand." Parables do two things at the same time. They reveal truth to people who are willing to wrestle with it, and they conceal truth from people who aren't interested enough to ask another question. To one person, it's just a story about a farmer. To another, it's an entirely new way of seeing the world. It's almost as though Jesus says, if you're willing to learn, there's more here. So, why don't you and I this morning lean into this parable? And I'd love to see Miles come on up. Because I'm always taken with gratitude. Because as I get older, I know how mobility gets more difficult. And to be able to come out and to be with the family of God warms my heart. Thank you, Miles, for showing us the shadow. So let's lean in, if we can, to our parable of the sower, because I think Jesus is still scattering some seeds this morning. And not just onto Galilean hillsides. I think the Lord is scattering some seeds upon us this morning. Onto people who are tired, people who are anxious, people carrying grief, people trying to decide what comes next, people wondering if God still has anything to say to me. The question isn't whether God is scattering seed. The question seems to be, where does it land? And now Jesus explains these four soils as four different ways people might receive the Word of God. But I wonder if there are also four different landscapes that are inside of you and inside of me. Because every single one of us has different voices competing for the steering wheel. Every day, every decision, every opportunity, every relationship, every invitation from God, some voice always seems to speak first. And maybe Jesus is asking you and asking me, which voice gets the final word? When Jesus is asked elsewhere what's the greatest commandment, he does something remarkable. He doesn't quote one of the 613 commandments of the Torah. He summarizes them all. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Heart, soul, mind, strength. Body, emotions, intellect, spirit. The whole person. That's you, that's me. And I wonder if those four soils sound a little bit like those four parts of ourselves. The four parts competing for the steering wheel. The four parts that make us, us. And with deference to the one voice that Jesus is asking you and me to amplify this morning. So let's begin with the body. Anybody remember the anti-drug campaign in the 1980s? Just say no. You remember that? I think it was Nancy Reagan who said, just say no. Simple, direct, 3 words. I was talking with a friend of mine back then who smoked a lot of marijuana, almost every day. And he used to laugh at that slogan. And he used to ask one question, just say no. Why? Why should I? Helps me relax, numbs the pain, makes me feel better. His body had already answered the question before the Spirit ever got involved. Our bodies are wonderful gifts from God. They're also remarkably persuasive. They crave comfort. They avoid pain. They love routine. They're built for survival. And when survival becomes our only lens, every new possibility feels dangerous. Forgiveness feels dangerous. Generosity feels dangerous. Serving feels exhausting. Changing feels uncomfortable. This is a hard path. The seed never gets beneath the surface because comfort has already declared, no thanks. And then there's the rocky soil. Let's call this the emotions. This voice is enthusiastic. It's optimistic. It's impulsive. It's the part of us that signs up for a gym membership on January 1st, orders the new running shoes, buys matching water bottles, posts motivational quotes on their socials, and by February, the shoes are hanging in the garage. The emotions love beginnings, the newness, the now and now. They're less excited about Tuesdays, about perseverance, about showing up after the excitement fades. 10 years ago, the online dating world changed forever. One little invention called the swipe. Suddenly, meeting another human being looked less like a conversation and more like pulling the lever on a slot machine. Swipe, swipe, swipe. Researchers discovered something fascinating about that. The apps were intentionally designed around variable rewards. Maybe the next swipe, maybe the next person, maybe this one, which meant people weren't simply looking for relationships anymore, they were chasing dopamine. Eventually, many users reported exhaustion, burnout, feeling more lonely than when they began. Because emotions are wonderful servants, but they're terrible leaders. The flare goes brightly, they disappear. Jesus says seeds on rocky soil spring up quickly and then wither. How many of us have started something wonderful only to let our enthusiasm expire before our faith had time to grow the roots? I'm glad I'm the only one here. Body, emotions, then we come to the thorns, then we come to the intellect. This one surprised me, because the intellect is one of God's greatest gifts. I love thinking. Many of you know that, heck, you're Episcopalians. You like books, you like history, you like theology, you like ideas. God gave us minds to use, but intellect has a shadow side. It can explain away anything. In 1857, the Supreme Court of this land issued its infamous Dred Scott decision. 7 of the 9 smartest legal minds in America concluded that enslaved people were property, not citizens, property. Brilliant minds, terrible conclusions. Intelligence doesn't automatically produce wisdom. Sometimes it simply produces more sophisticated justifications. Sometimes the intellect can become a prison. It wants more information. Another spreadsheet, one more article, one more podcast, one more comparison, one more analysis, until eventually nothing happens. Jesus says the thorns choke the plant. Notice, they don't kill it immediately. They slowly crowd out its life. I've seen this happen as a pastor. A man once came into my office with a decision to make. He'd been offered a wonderful new job, better salary, excellent benefits, shorter commute. Every box on that spreadsheet was checked. His intellect had already decided, except his spirit had not, which is why he was in my office. Something about the company's culture troubled him. Something about their values felt hollow. He couldn't quite explain it. There wasn't a logical reason. There wasn't an intellectual reason. Just an inner restlessness. He eventually turned the offer down. Months later, he discovered the company was collapsing under a toxic culture and unethical leadership. His spirit had noticed something long before his intellect could prove it. Which brings us to the good soil. And the good soil is your spirit, is my spirit, is our deepest selves. Not because the spirit is the only voice that matters, but because it's the only voice capable of putting the others in their proper place. The body asks, what feels good? The emotions ask, what feels exciting? The intellect asks, what makes sense? The spirit asks, what leads me closer to God? What leads me closer to light? What leads me closer to love? Which, of course, is the theme of the entire religion, is love. And it's the theme of your soul. They're not the same questions. Sometimes the Spirit will ask your body to do something uncomfortable. Sometimes the Spirit will ask your emotions to be patient. Sometimes the Spirit will ask your intellect to admit, I don't know. Because faith isn't irrational. It's just larger than reason alone. The Spirit is the place where purpose begins. It's where peace arrives before certainty. It's where courage appears before evidence. It's where grace quietly takes root. Here's what strikes me most about this parable, friends. The sower appears to be absolutely reckless. He throws seeds everywhere. On paths, on rocks, into weeds, on good soil. Any modern farmer would say, dude, you're wasting a lot of seeds by tossing them on the driveway. But that's not how God works. God's seeds, the seeds of possibility, hope, ingenuity, newness, wonder. These are the seeds we need to make God's world this world. These are the seeds that are needed to make thy kingdom come, thy will be done. And God keeps sowing these seeds into stubborn hearts, into distracted hearts, into frightened hearts, into hopeful hearts, again, again, and again. Because God believes something about us that we often forget. And that is that soil can change. Paths can become broken up. Rocks can be removed. Thorns can be pulled. The point of this parable isn't that some people are doomed to be bad soil forever. The point is that we already have that good soil within us. And what God never stops cultivating. God is always tilling, friends. Always watering, always pruning, always planting, always believing that today's hard ground might become tomorrow's harvest. Always asking us to reach for the higher, the better, the more virtuous. So perhaps the question isn't, which soil am I? Maybe the better question is, which voice is loudest in me today? Is your body making every decision? Your emotions, your intellect? Or has your spirit been given room to speak? Because the seeds are constantly being scattered. A conversation, an apology, a chance to forgive, a new calling, an unexpected friendship, a difficult truth, a whisper from God. The seed is in the air. The only question is where it lands. My prayer this morning isn't that you'll silence your body or your emotions or your intellect. God created every one of them. My prayer is simply that your spirit becomes the loudest voice in the room. The tragedy is when the quietest voice never gets a chance to finish its sentence, because the body is a wonderful servant but a terrible master. Your emotions are a beautiful gift, but they were never meant to steer our lives. Your intellect is one of God's greatest blessings, but it cannot answer every question worth asking. Only your spirit can listen for the voice of the one who made you. That's why Jesus tells this parable. Not so we'll spend our lives trying to figure out which soil we are, but so we'll learn which voice to trust. Because every single day, God is scattering those seeds. I'm wondering what those seeds are looking like in your life today. New opportunity going through your mind? Wrestling with a difficult truth? A chance to love? A chance to forgive? A chance to become someone just a little more like Jesus than you were yesterday? Every day that seed comes. Again, the only question, which voice receives it? And so this week, before you make that decision, before you send that email, before you speak those words, before you assume the worst, pause, listen, ask yourself one question. Who's talking right now? Who's talking right now? Is it my body, my emotions, my intellect? Is it my spirit, the good soil? Because when the spirit becomes the loudest voice in your life, your body becomes an instrument of compassion. Your emotions become a source of empathy instead of volatility. Your intellect becomes a servant of wisdom instead of anxiety. And your life, almost without you noticing, will bear more and more fruit. Not because you tried harder, not because you became smarter, Not because you finally got everything under control, but because you learned little by little, day by day, to say yes to that still, small voice of God. And that, my friends, is where every abundant harvest begins.